Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale reveals the power of resilience, hope, and the strength of the human spirit. Today, we bring you the heartwarming journey of Grace, a woman whose life was shattered by betrayal but rebuilt with courage and love. From false accusations to a triumphant fresh start, her story reminds us all that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance for redemption. Subscribe now to join us as we begin Grace's incredible story, filled with lessons about empathy, forgiveness, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Let's start today's journey together. My name is Grace Adams, and for years, I had been a devoted housekeeper for the Williams family in Boston. I remember the first day I walked into their grand estate in Beacon Hill. With its marble floors and sparkling chandeliers, I was overwhelmed by its opulence. But more than that, I was determined to give my all to the job. The Williamses were a wealthy, influential family, but they had their own cracks beneath the polished surface. Vanessa, the eldest daughter, had a sharpness about her that intimidated most people. She was always impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled, and her green eyes carried an air of arrogance. To her, I was just the help. She barely acknowledged me unless she had a command or a complaint. Emma, her younger sister, was different. At 15, she was still full of curiosity and innocence. With her curly brown hair and warm smile, Emma treated me like family, often calling me Mom Grace. It was a term of endearment that filled my heart with joy but, as I would soon discover, also sparked jealousy in Vanessa. That jealousy slowly brewed into something far more sinister. One sunny afternoon, I was in Emma's room, tidying up her scattered books and clothes. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, reading a novel. "Grace," she said, her voice soft, "I don't know what we'd do without you. You're like a second mom to me." Her words warmed me, but I noticed Vanessa standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. Her face was a mask of disdain. "Teaching her to be a maid like you, Grace," she sneered, tossing her designer purse onto the couch with a calculated air of superiority. "You should stick to cleaning. Leave the lessons to people who know better." I smiled gently, choosing not to engage. "I teach respect and kindness, Miss Vanessa. Those are lessons anyone can learn, no matter their position." Vanessa snorted, her green eyes narrowing. "Respect? From you? You barely know what that means." She turned and stormed out, leaving a tense silence behind her. Emma looked at me, her eyes full of concern. "Don't let her get to you," she whispered. "I won't," I replied with a smile. But the truth was, Vanessa's words lingered. Over time, her hostility grew more pointed. Little did I know that she was planning something that would turn my world upside down. Later that evening, as I finished organizing the kitchen, Vanessa burst in, her face contorted with fury. In her hands was an empty jewelry box, one I recognized as belonging to her, a box that once held an expensive diamond necklace. "You stole it, didn't you?" she spat, her voice dripping with accusation. "Don't even try to deny it." I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process her words. "Miss Vanessa," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I would never steal anything. That's not who I am." She let out a cold laugh and slammed the jewelry box onto the counter. "You think anyone will believe you over me? A housekeeper? You're nothing but a thief trying to live above your station." Before I could respond, Nathan Williams, the family patriarch, entered the room. His presence was as commanding as ever, with his silver hair neatly combed and his tailored suit a perfect fit. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Vanessa turned to him, her expression shifting to one of feigned innocence. "Father," she said, her voice softening, "I found this in Grace's room. She stole my necklace." My heart sank. "Mr. Williams," I pleaded, "I didn't take it. I don't know how that box ended up in my room. Please believe me." Nathan's gaze was cold and calculating as he looked between Vanessa and me. He didn't yell or raise his voice. But his words were no less devastating. Grace. The evidence speaks for itself. Pack your things. You're no longer welcome here. I wanted to scream. To demand that he investigate further. But I knew it was useless. Vanessa's word held more weight than mine ever could. Emma ran into the room. Her eyes filled with tears. Dad. No. Grace would never do this. She's like family to us. Nathan dismissed her protests with a wave of his hand. Emma. This is not your concern. Go to your room. As I walked back to my quarters to gather my belongings, Emma followed me, her small hands clutching mine. I'll help you. Grace, she whispered through her tears. I'll find a way to fix this. I promise. Her words were a small comfort. But as I packed the few things I owned, I felt a deep sense of despair. This wasn't just about losing my job, it was about losing my place in a home I had poured my heart into. And worse. It meant being separated from my son. Lucas. Lucas was everything to me. He was a bright, curious boy who loved dinosaurs and always greeted me with the biggest hugs when I came home from work. But with nowhere to go and no way to provide for him, I had no choice but to leave him in Nathan's care. The thought of being apart from him tore at my soul. As I stepped out of the grand estate and into the cold night, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me. My reputation, my livelihood, my son, they had all been taken from me in a single, cruel moment. But even as the tears streamed down my face, a spark of determination flickered within me. I would prove my innocence. I would clear my name and get Lucas back. No matter how long it took or how hard the road ahead would be, I knew I had to fight. For him. For us. This was only the beginning of my journey. The next morning, as I walked aimlessly through the crowded streets of Boston, the bitter cold nipped at my skin, a sharp reminder of the reality I faced. The world around me seemed to blur, people hurrying to work, the sound of honking cars, and the distant hum of life continuing without me. I clutched the small bag containing my belongings tightly, as if it held the last pieces of my dignity. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. How had Vanessa set me up so perfectly? And why? What had I ever done to deserve such cruelty? Finding shelter became my first priority. I ended up at a modest homeless shelter on the outskirts of the city. The woman at the reception desk gave me a once-over, her expression a mixture of pity and detachment. We have a bed for tonight, she said. Breakfast is at 7. Don't miss it. The room was sparse, with metal-framed beds lined up against the walls and the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. As I lay down, the weight of my situation pressed down on me like never before. I had gone from being a trusted housekeeper in one of Boston's most prominent families to a homeless woman accused of theft. The fall was staggering, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead made it almost impossible to breathe. But as despair began to settle in, I reminded myself why I had to keep going. Lucas. His face, with his wide, curious eyes and infectious laugh, flashed in my mind. I had to clear my name for him, to prove that his mother wasn't a thief. That thought gave me strength, even as exhaustion pulled me into a restless sleep. The next day, I began looking for work. The city I once walked with pride now felt like a battlefield. At every door I knocked on, I was met with rejection. We've heard about you, one manager said dismissively. We don't want trouble here. Others didn't even bother to hide their disdain. A thief doesn't deserve a second chance, one man spat, his words cutting deeper than he could have imagined. By evening, I was drained, both physically and emotionally. I sat on a park bench, my hands trembling from the cold. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I couldn't break down. Not here. Not now. As I looked up at the grey sky, I whispered to myself, "You've faced worse. Grace. You'll get through this." That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Grace." I turned to see Emma standing a few feet away, her breath visible in the crisp winter air. She looked hesitant, almost afraid, but her eyes were filled with concern. "I've been looking for you," she said, stepping closer. She held a small envelope in her hands, which she thrust toward me. This might help." I opened the envelope with trembling hands and found a handwritten note. "I don't have proof yet, but I know Vanessa is lying," it read. "She's always been jealous of you, and she would do anything to get rid of you. Please don't give up. I'll find a way to expose her." Tears blurred my vision as I looked back at Emma. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because you're family, Grace," she said simply. "And family doesn't give up on each other." Her words reignited something in me, a spark of hope that I thought had been extinguished. I hugged her tightly, and for the first time in days, I felt like I wasn't entirely alone. Over the next few days, Emma and I worked in secret. She couldn't do much without raising Vanessa's suspicion, but she managed to gather small pieces of information. A conversation overheard here, a suspicious action there. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One evening, Emma called me from a payphone. "Vanessa's been acting strange," she said in a hushed tone. "I saw her sneaking out of the house last night with a small box. She wouldn't tell anyone where she was going." My heart raced. "Do you think it's the necklace?" "I don't know," Emma replied, her voice tinged with frustration. "But I'll find out. I promise." Hanging up the phone, I felt a mix of hope and dread. If Emma could uncover the truth, it would be my salvation. But I also knew the risks she was taking. Vanessa wasn't just cruel, she was calculating. If she discovered Emma's involvement, there was no telling what she might do. That night, as I sat in the shelter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Vanessa's hatred for me ran deeper than I'd realized. But why? Was it simply jealousy? Or was there something else driving her actions? I had no answers. Only questions that seemed to multiply with every passing day. The next morning, as I stepped out of the shelter, I found myself drawn back to the Williams estate. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't stay away. I needed to see Lucas, even if only from a distance, hiding behind the tall hedges that bordered the property. I watched as he played in the garden, his laughter filling the air. My chest tightened with a mix of joy and sorrow. He looked so happy, so carefree. But how long would that last without me? As I turned to leave, I caught sight of Vanessa near the edge of the estate's lake. She was holding something small and metallic, which she threw into the water with a force that made the surface ripple. My breath caught in my throat. What was she hiding? And why go to such lengths to get rid of it? I knew I couldn't let this go. Whatever Vanessa had thrown into the lake, it was important. It could be the key to proving my innocence. But how could I retrieve it without being caught? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but I still didn't have the full picture. All I knew was that I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when I was so close to the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind replayed the scene by the lake over and over again, Vanessa's hurried steps, the glint of metal in her hands, the splash as it disappeared into the water. Whatever she had discarded was important, and I was certain it had something to do with the missing necklace. But how could I retrieve it without drawing attention to myself? The next morning, I returned to the park bench where Emma had met me a few days earlier. I needed her help, but I couldn't risk contacting her directly. Vanessa's reach extended further than I had anticipated, and I feared she might have someone watching Emma. Instead, I left a note tucked under the edge of the bench, written hastily on the back of an old receipt. "Vanessa threw something into the lake near the estate. I need to get it. Can you help?" I didn't know if Emma would find the note, let alone act on it. But it was the only plan I had. The rest of the day dragged on, the hours stretching endlessly as I wandered the streets of Boston. My stomach growled with hunger, but I ignored it, too consumed by the weight of everything that had happened. By nightfall, I returned to the shelter. Exhausted and defeated. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts in my mind. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a faint knock on the window. My heart leapt in my chest as I sat up, straining to see through the darkness. A familiar figure stood outside, bundled in a heavy coat. It was Emma. I quickly opened the window, the cold air rushing in. "Emma, what are you doing here?" I whispered, my voice a mix of relief and worry. "I found your note," she said. Her cheeks flushed from the cold. "And I think I know how we can get whatever Vanessa threw into the lake." I let her in, and we sat on the edge of the bed. Speaking in hushed tones, Emma explained that she had overheard Vanessa talking to one of her friends about the lake, mentioning something about ensuring no one ever finds it. Emma's suspicions were growing, and she was determined to help me uncover the truth. "We'll need to go late at night," Emma said. "When the estate is quiet. I can distract the guards. But you'll have to get into the lake yourself." I nodded, my heart pounding. The idea of sneaking onto the estate filled me with both fear and determination. If this was my chance to clear my name, I couldn't afford to hesitate. 2 nights later, we put our plan into action. Emma waited near the estate's entrance, engaging the guards in conversation while I slipped through a gap in the hedge. The garden was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of frost beneath my shoes. I made my way to the lake, my breaths visible in the cold night air. The water shimmered under the pale moonlight, calm and undisturbed. I hesitated for a moment, the reality of what I was about to do sinking in. My clothes would be soaked. The cold would be unbearable. But I couldn't let that stop me. I stepped into the lake, the icy water biting at my skin. Each step was a struggle, the mud beneath the surface sucking at my shoes. I moved as quietly as possible, praying that no one would hear the faint splashes. As I reached the deeper part of the lake, I began to feel around with my hands, hoping to find whatever Vanessa had discarded. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. My fingers were numb, and the cold had seeped into my bones. But I refused to give up. Just as I was about to retreat, my hand brushed against something solid. My heart raced as I pulled it from the water, a small metal box, its surface tarnished but intact. I quickly made my way back to the shore, shivering uncontrollably as I clutched the box to my chest. Emma was waiting for me near the hedge, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "Did you find it?" she asked urgently. I nodded, too cold to speak. We didn't stop to examine the box. We needed to get as far from the estate as possible before anyone noticed we had been there. Once we were safely back at the shelter, I finally opened the box, my hands trembling from both the cold and anticipation. Inside was the necklace, glimmering even in the dim light of the room. But there was more. A folded piece of paper rested beneath it, the handwriting on it unmistakably Vanessa's. I unfolded the note, my breath catching as I read the words. "Grace will never take my place. She doesn't belong here. This necklace will make sure she's out of our lives forever." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at Emma, who was staring at the note in shock. "This proves it," I said, my voice trembling. "She set me up. She wanted me gone." Emma nodded, her expression resolute. "We need to take this to the court. Grace, this is your chance to clear your name." The weight of everything hit me at once, relief, anger, fear. The evidence was finally in my hands. But I knew the battle wasn't over. I still had to face Vanessa and the Williams family in court, to prove my innocence in front of everyone who had turned their backs on me. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. The truth was finally within reach. The courtroom was packed, every seat taken by curious onlookers eager to witness the scandal that had rocked the Williams family. The air was thick with tension, the murmurs of the crowd fading to silence as the judge entered and called the court to order. I sat at the defendant's table, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Emma was beside me, her calm demeanor offering a small measure of comfort. In my hands, I clutched the metal box and Vanessa's damning note. It was the only tangible proof I had of my innocence. And I prayed it would be enough. On the opposite side of the room sat the Williams family. Vanessa, poised and elegant as always, exuded an air of calm confidence that made my stomach churn. Her father, William, looked as stern and cold as ever, his loyalty to his eldest daughter clear in the way he avoided even glancing in my direction. Beside him sat Alice, Vanessa's mother, her face a mask of forced neutrality. The trial began with the family's lawyer presenting their case. He painted me as a deceitful opportunist who had exploited their kindness and trust for personal gain. His words were like sharp daggers, each one aimed at my character and reputation. Grace Daniels was a trusted employee, the lawyer declared, his voice echoing through the courtroom. But behind her facade of loyalty and humility, she harbored a darker intent. She stole a family heirloom, a necklace of immense value, and tried to escape justice. I gripped the edges of the table, my knuckles white. I wanted to shout, to defend myself. But I knew my moment would come. For now, I had to endure their accusations. The lawyer produced photographs of the necklace and a list of supposed witnesses who had seen me near Vanessa's room on the day it went missing. I felt the weight of the stares around me, each one filled with judgment and disdain. My cheeks burned. But I kept my head high, refusing to let them see me falter. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood, the metal box and note in my hands. My voice wavered as I began, but I forced myself to continue. Your Honor, I am not the thief they claim I am. I have worked for the Williams family for years with honesty and integrity. I loved and cared for this family, especially their youngest daughter, Emma. I could never betray them in the way they describe. I opened the box, holding up the necklace for everyone to see. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, and all eyes turned to Vanessa. Her composure faltered for the briefest moment, her green eyes narrowing as she realized what I held. This necklace was not stolen. I continued, my voice gaining strength. It was hidden by Vanessa Williams herself. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder as I unfolded the note and handed it to the judge. This is a note written by Vanessa, explaining her motives. She didn't want me in the house anymore. She saw me as a threat, as someone trying to take her mother's place. The judge read the note silently, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, addressing Vanessa directly. Miss Williams, do you have a response to this accusation? Vanessa stood, her demeanor icy. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. That note is a forgery. Grace is clearly desperate and willing to go to any lengths to save herself. Her lawyer quickly added, Your Honor, this note and necklace could have been planted by Grace as part of an elaborate scheme. We request that their authenticity be thoroughly investigated. The judge nodded. This court will not make a decision without further evidence. I will call for an independent investigation to verify the validity of the items presented. Though I knew it was necessary, the delay felt like a punch to the gut. I had hoped the note would be enough to end this nightmare. But Vanessa's ability to manipulate the situation was proving stronger than I had anticipated. After the session, Emma and I left the courtroom together. My shoulders sagged with exhaustion. But Emma's determined expression gave me a sliver of hope. We'll get through this, she said, her voice firm. Vanessa can't keep hiding behind lies forever. Over the next few days, investigators worked tirelessly to authenticate the note and necklace. It was a grueling wait, each passing hour filled with anxiety and fear. What if they found some way to discredit the evidence? What if Vanessa's influence extended further than I realized? Finally, the day arrived when the court reconvened. The judge's voice cut through the room, commanding silence as he addressed the findings. The investigation has confirmed the authenticity of the note and the necklace, he announced. The handwriting is conclusively identified as Vanessa Williams', and there is no evidence to suggest that Grace Daniels tampered with or falsified these items. A wave of relief washed over me, and tears filled my eyes. Emma squeezed my hand, her own expression a mixture of joy and vindication. The judge continued, his tone stern as he turned to Vanessa. Miss Williams, the evidence presented against you is overwhelming. You are hereby charged with perjury, tampering with evidence, and attempting to falsely incriminate an innocent person. The courtroom erupted into chaos, reporters scrambling to capture every detail. Vanessa's confident facade crumbled as officers approached to escort her out of the room. Her parents sat in stunned silence, their world unraveling before their eyes. As for me, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. My name had been cleared, and the truth had finally prevailed. Though the journey had been long and painful, I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, strength, and the determination to rebuild my life. The courtroom had emptied, leaving behind a silence that felt both liberating and unsettling. As Vanessa was led away, her once impenetrable confidence shattered. I remained seated, processing the whirlwind of events. I had been vindicated, but the scars of what I'd endured were still fresh. My name was cleared, yet the sting of betrayal lingered. Emma stayed beside me, her unwavering support a lifeline through the storm. Her quiet strength had been my anchor, and I felt a deep gratitude toward her. She was not just an ally, she had become family. You did it, Grace, Emma said softly, her brown eyes shining with relief and pride. You stood tall and fought for the truth. You never gave up. I nodded, still struggling to find my voice. I couldn't have done it without you, I managed to say. Your belief in me kept me going when I thought I couldn't. Emma smiled, but there was sadness in her gaze. Vanessa's actions hurt more people than just you, Grace. My father, my mother, even me. But what she did was her choice. And now she'll have to face the consequences. Her words reminded me of the pain the Williams family had endured. A pain I had been pulled into unwillingly. Vanessa's need for control and her fear of being replaced had blinded her to the damage she caused. I couldn't erase the past, but I could choose how I responded to it. That evening, back in the small apartment I'd been staying in since the ordeal began, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it was a sanctuary compared to the turmoil of the Williams mansion. I sat by the window, the cool breeze carrying the scent of rain, and thought about what came next. I had won my freedom, but rebuilding my life wouldn't be easy. The rumors and whispers in the community might persist, and the shadow of the trial might linger. Still, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had survived something most people couldn't imagine, and that resilience would guide me forward. The next day, Emma arrived at my apartment with a bag of groceries and a smile that brightened the dim space. You've been through enough, she said, placing the bag on the counter. Let me help you get back on your feet. I chuckled, touched by her kindness. Emma, you've already done so much. You don't have to. I want to, she interrupted gently. You were there for me when no one else was. Grace, you treated me like family when my own sister didn't. Now it's my turn. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Emma's loyalty and love reminded me of the goodness that still existed, even in the face of betrayal. Together, we began to make plans for the future. Emma encouraged me to pursue my passion for cooking, suggesting I open a small catering business. You have a gift, Grace, she said enthusiastically. Your food always brought people together at the mansion. Why not share that with others? The idea sparked a glimmer of hope in me. I had spent years honing my skills in the kitchen, and the thought of turning that into a new beginning was both exciting and daunting. With Emma's encouragement, I decided to take the first steps. We spent hours brainstorming names for the business, sketching ideas for menus, and imagining the kind of life I could build. As the weeks passed, My life began to take shape. Emma and I worked tirelessly to prepare for the launch of the catering business. She introduced me to contacts who could help, and her optimism was infectious. Every day felt like a step toward reclaiming my independence and identity. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, while running errands in town, I overheard a group of women whispering about the trial. Their words stung. A painful reminder of how quickly people judged without knowing the full story. I heard she was let off on a technicality, one of them said. "Can you believe the Williams family fell apart because of her?" Another added. I clenched my jaw, the familiar ache of injustice bubbling to the surface. Emma noticed my reaction and gently placed a hand on my arm. "They don't matter," she said firmly. "You know the truth. And so do the people who matter." Her words steadied me, and I resolved to focus on what truly mattered, building a future I could be proud of. The whispers would fade, but my actions would speak louder than their words ever could. A few days later, I received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Williams himself stood at my doorstep. His face etched with a mixture of remorse and humility. He was a far cry from the authoritative man who had once dismissed me without a second thought. "Grace," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "I owe you an apology, a real one. I was wrong to doubt you, to let Vanessa's lies blind me. You didn't deserve what we put you through." I studied him for a moment, searching for sincerity in his eyes. There was no arrogance, no defensiveness, only genuine regret. "Thank you for saying that," I replied quietly. "It means more than you know." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Emma has told me about your plans for the catering business. I want to help in any way I can. It's the least I can do." The offer surprised me, but I could see that it came from a place of true contrition. Accepting his help felt like a step toward healing, not just for me, but for him as well. As he left, I felt a weight lift from my heart. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose to move forward without the burden of resentment. With Emma by my side and the support of unexpected allies, my life was beginning to feel like my own again. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. The morning of the launch of my catering business dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the stormy path that had brought me here. The modest sign above the door read "Graceful Bites," a name Emma had suggested. Saying it reflected both my journey and the warmth I brought to my cooking. The storefront was simple but inviting, with soft white curtains and cheerful potted plants lining the entrance. Inside, the air was filled with the aroma of fresh-baked bread, roasted herbs, and simmering sauces. The space was small, but every detail had been thoughtfully designed. From the warm wooden counters to the handwritten chalkboard menu displaying the day's offerings. Emma was already bustling around, making sure everything was in place. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and I couldn't help but smile as she adjusted a bouquet of wildflowers on one of the tables. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I nodded, though my heart was racing. "I think so. It's surreal to see it all come together." Emma placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You've worked so hard for this, Grace. Today is your day." As the first customers trickled in, I felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration. Among them were familiar faces, neighbors who had watched my story unfold, and strangers drawn by curiosity or the scent of freshly brewed coffee. Some offered warm smiles, while others seemed hesitant, their expressions a mix of curiosity and lingering doubt. One of the first to approach the counter was Mrs. Carter, a kind woman who had often defended me in the face of public gossip. "Grace, this place is lovely," she said, her voice warm. "I've been looking forward to this day. I'll have one of those scones you're famous for." Her words bolstered my confidence, and I handed her the pastry with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter. It means a lot to have your support." As the morning wore on, the shop grew busier. Emma worked seamlessly beside me, her charm and humor putting customers at ease. By midday, the small space was buzzing with chatter and laughter. Seeing people enjoy my food, their smiles genuine and unguarded, filled me with a sense of fulfillment I hadn't felt in years. But amidst the joy, there were moments that reminded me of the road I'd traveled. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit lingered by the counter, his gaze scanning the room before settling on me. I recognized him as one of Vanessa's friends, someone who had been vocal in defending her during the trial. His presence sent a ripple of unease through me. I wasn't sure if I should come, he admitted, his tone cautious. But I heard about this place, and I wanted to see for myself. I met his gaze, my heart steady. You're welcome here, I said simply, offering a small smile. He hesitated before nodding. I'll take a coffee and a slice of that pie. As I prepared his order, I couldn't help but wonder what had brought him here. Was it curiosity? Or perhaps a desire to make amends? When I handed him the plate, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. I misjudged you, Grace, he said quietly, his voice tinged with regret. I'm sorry for believing what I heard instead of seeking the truth. His apology took me by surprise, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Finally, I said, "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." He nodded, then took his seat, blending into the crowd. The encounter left me with a sense of closure, a reminder that even those who had doubted me were capable of change. As the day wound down, Emma and I stood side by side, surveying the shop. The last customer had just left, and the room was bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The tables were scattered with empty plates and cups, evidence of a successful opening day. I think we did it, Emma said, her voice filled with pride. I smiled, exhaustion mingling with a deep sense of accomplishment. We did. She turned to me, her expression serious. Grace, you've created something beautiful here. This is more than a business, it's a testament to your strength and resilience. Her words resonated deeply. This small shop, with its warm light and inviting atmosphere, was more than I had dared to dream of during the darkest days. It was proof that I could rebuild my life, piece by piece. As we cleaned up, my thoughts turned to the future. There was still so much to do, so much to achieve. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. This wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new story. That night, as I closed the shop and stepped into the cool evening air, I felt a quiet sense of peace. The stars above seemed brighter, the world around me calmer. I had faced the storm and come out stronger. And though the scars remained, they no longer defined me. Instead, they were reminders of a battle won, of a life reclaimed. The weeks that followed the opening of Graceful Bites were a whirlwind of activity, filled with moments that stitched themselves into the fabric of my new life. Each day brought new faces, new challenges, and new reasons to keep moving forward. The little shop became a beacon for the community, a place where people gathered not just for food, but for warmth and connection. One morning, as I prepared a fresh batch of cinnamon rolls, the bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. I glanced up and froze for a moment. Standing there, clutching a large bouquet of daisies, was someone I hadn't expected to see, James, my former colleague and one of the few who had stood by me when my world was crumbling. Grace, he said, his voice warm but cautious. I heard about the shop and thought I'd stop by. Congratulations. A wave of emotion washed over me. James had been a silent ally during the trial, offering quiet words of encouragement when I needed them most. Seeing him now felt like another piece of my past finding its way back into my life. James, I replied, stepping out from behind the counter. It's so good to see you. Thank you for coming. He handed me the bouquet, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I figured you could use some flowers to brighten up the place, though it doesn't seem like it needs much help. This shop, it's you. Grace. It feels like you. I took the bouquet, touched by his thoughtfulness. Thank you. That means a lot to me. As we chatted, it became clear that James's visit was more than a casual stop. He spoke of how he had followed my story, how he had always believed in my innocence despite the storm of accusations. His faith in me, even from a distance, had been a quiet source of strength. Before he left, he paused, his expression serious. Grace, I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've built here, but for the way you've carried yourself through everything. It's inspiring. His words stayed with me long after he walked out the door, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there had been people who saw the truth, people who believed in me. As the shop continued to flourish, so did my sense of belonging. Customers who had once whispered about me now greeted me with genuine smiles. The walls that had once felt so confining now held the laughter of a community brought together by food and fellowship. One particularly busy afternoon, as Emma and I rushed to keep up with orders, a young woman approached the counter. She looked nervous, her hands clutching a small notepad. She introduced herself as Sarah, a journalist working on a feature about local businesses. I've heard about your story, Grace, she said, her voice soft but steady. I'd like to write about it. Not just about the shop, but about everything you've been through. I think people need to hear it. The idea of revisiting the past in such a public way made my stomach twist. But I could see the sincerity in her eyes. She wasn't looking for a scandal or a sensational headline, she wanted to tell a story of resilience and hope. Let me think about it, I said. And she nodded, leaving her card on the counter. That evening, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I considered her offer. The thought of sharing my journey was daunting, but it also felt like an opportunity to reclaim the narrative, to show the world that I was more than the woman they had accused, more than the victim of someone else's lies. The next morning, I called Sarah and agreed to the interview. Over the course of several days, we talked about everything: the trial, the betrayal, the moments of despair, and the small victories that had led me here. She listened with empathy, her questions thoughtful and respectful. When the article was published, the response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of struggle and survival. The community rallied around me in a way I hadn't expected, their support a balm to the wounds that still lingered. One day, as I was tidying up the shop, a woman approached me. She looked familiar, and as she introduced herself, I realized she had been in the courtroom during my trial. She had been one of Vanessa's friends, someone who had believed the lies. I came to apologize, she said, her voice trembling. I was wrong to judge you. Reading your story in the paper, it opened my eyes. I'm so sorry, Grace. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It means a lot to hear that. Her visit was one of many, each one a small step toward healing. The shop became a place not just for food, but for forgiveness and reconciliation. It was a space where people could shed their prejudices and see each other for who they truly were. As I stood behind the counter one evening, watching Emma chat with a group of regulars, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested me in ways I never could have imagined, but it had also shown me the strength I didn't know I possessed. And though the scars remained, they were no longer marks of pain, they were badges of survival. Reminders of a journey that had shaped me into the person I was becoming. As the days unfolded into weeks, Graceful Bites became more than just a bakery, it became a sanctuary. A steady stream of regulars filled the shop each morning, their faces familiar and welcoming. Emma was a natural at the counter, her charm and energy brightening the space as much as the morning sunlight streaming through the large windows. One day, as I prepared a batch of blueberry scones, Emma rushed into the kitchen, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Grace, there's someone you need to meet, she said, pulling me toward the front of the shop. Standing there was a man in his late 30s. his face lined with exhaustion but softened by a gentle smile. He introduced himself as David, the director of a local shelter. "I've heard about your story," he began, his voice low but steady. "What you've built here is incredible. I was wondering if you'd be willing to partner with us." "Partner?" I asked, intrigued but uncertain. "We provide meals for families who are struggling," he explained. "Most of what we serve is donated. But we want to offer something that feels special. Something that reminds them of home. Your baked goods could make a real difference." The sincerity in his eyes stirred something deep within me. I knew what it felt like to be lost. To crave a sense of normalcy when life seemed anything but. "I'd be honored," I said, shaking his hand. That partnership became a turning point for both the shop and for me. Every week, Emma and I prepared trays of cookies, loaves of bread, and muffins to deliver to the shelter. It wasn't just about the food, it was about extending a hand to those who needed it most. Each visit reminded me of how far I had come, and how much farther I wanted to go. One particularly chilly morning, as Emma and I loaded boxes into the car, a familiar figure approached from across the street. It was Vanessa, her expression hesitant, her hands clutching a scarf around her neck. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to say or do. "Grace," she called softly, her voice carried by the wind. "Can we talk?" Emma glanced at me, concern flickering in her eyes. But I nodded. "Go ahead," I said to her. "I'll handle this." Vanessa stood a few feet away, her gaze fixed on the pavement. "I've been wanting to apologize," she began, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. About everything. I let jealousy and bitterness blind me, and I hurt you in ways I can't even begin to justify." Her words, though sincere, reopened old wounds. "You didn't just hurt me," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You tried to destroy me." "I know," she said, tears welling up. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. You didn't deserve any of it." I studied her for a moment, searching for the truth in her eyes. And I found it. She wasn't looking for redemption, she was seeking closure. "Vanessa," I said, my voice softening, "forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of their actions. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because I need to move on." Her shoulders sagged with relief. And for the first time, I saw her as a human being, flawed and broken, just like me. She nodded, whispering, "Thank you," before turning and walking away. That encounter lingered with me as Emma and I delivered the baked goods to the shelter. Watching the children's faces light up as they sampled our treats reminded me why I had chosen this path. Life was about creating moments of joy, however fleeting, and holding on to them like precious gems. Back at the shop, things were busier than ever. Sarah's article had brought in waves of customers, many of whom shared their own stories of struggle and perseverance. Each conversation deepened my appreciation for the resilience of the human spirit. One afternoon, as I sat in the back room reviewing orders, David from the shelter stopped by. "I wanted to tell you something," he said, his tone serious but kind. "There's a family at the shelter, a mother and her 2 kids. They've been through so much. But your baked goods, they're the highlight of their week. You're giving them hope. Grace." His words hit me like a wave. In my quest to rebuild my own life, I had stumbled upon something even greater, the power to lift others up. It was a gift I hadn't anticipated, but one I was determined to nurture. As the months passed, the shop became a cornerstone of the community. Emma and I hosted baking classes for children, partnered with local farmers for fresh ingredients, and even launched a pay-it-forward board where customers could buy treats for those in need. But it wasn't just about the shop. It was about the connections I had forged, the lives I had touched, and the healing I had found in the process. Each day was a reminder that life's greatest victories often come not from avoiding pain, but from facing it head-on and emerging stronger. One evening, as I closed up the shop, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was no longer defined by her past. She was resilient, compassionate, and, above all, free. With a deep breath, I turned off the lights and stepped into the crisp night air. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready for whatever came next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the bakery's windows, Grace paused to take in the scene around her. The once empty shop was now bustling with life, filled with laughter, conversation, and the sweet aroma of fresh-baked treats. Emma was chatting with a regular customer, her infectious smile lighting up the room, while David sat at a corner table, enjoying a coffee after another long day at the shelter. Grace knew that this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of a new one. The trials she had faced had shaped her into the person she was today, stronger, more compassionate, and deeply grateful for the second chance she had been given. Her bakery wasn't just a business, it was a place where kindness, resilience, and love flourished. As she flipped the sign on the door to closed for the evening, she turned to Emma and said, "This isn't just my story, it's ours. If you've been inspired by Grace's journey of hope and redemption, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt tales. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story."